So I'm going to skip the usual overblown intro owing to the lateness of the hour. I intended to record this episode yesterday, but just kind of ran out of steam. I have been grinding metal, as they say, putting in a lot of time, not getting enough sleep, trying to keep up with my workouts, and just do life as well as I can in my older homeowner era, as opposed to younger me who took a 2 to 3 hour nap almost every day. Now, I kind of knew how good I had it. But in the immortal words of Khan, in Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, when he asks Captain Kirk, "Have you ever read Milton?" And Kirk goes, "Yes." That particular story, Milton was the name of the author. I think the story is Paradise Lost. Is it better to rule in hell or serve in heaven? Now, I have not experienced either of those things, but if I'm asked the question, would I rather work harder, be a homeowner, and be on my own? Doesn't mean that I have never asked anyone for help or that there are not people in my life. But I would rather be where I am now, where I am the only one here, and I am supporting this place as well as I can. But it's mine. And I don't have to rely on other people to pay for things. I just have to keep up. And there are huge chunks of my existence where I didn't have real adult responsibilities, even though I was, by the letter of my ages, at various points, I was an adult. But think about what I said. I should not have been able to take naps every day. I should have been doing something. And yeah, I was a writer. I understand I didn't have a conventional 9 to 5, but still. Okay, if you're producing a lot of money, let's go that route. You're producing a lot of money. Take all the naps you want. But I was usually working on spec. I'd written a bunch of screenplays, numerous projects that were in the pipeline at various points. I could, if you asked me, you throw a certain year out there, 2003, what were you doing? Oh, that was the Tittle project, and it was with this person, and we were going to give it to that person. Like, that all happened. That's all real. But my easy life, living with my father, in my 20s, well into my 30s, I really was blessed. It was a charmed existence. Because my father didn't imagine that he was going to have a son like me. That might be a cliche, even though I was very much like him. We were different in very specific ways. The wiring wasn't that much different, but it was what we focused on and what each of us saw as important is where the parallels just stopped. So the reason why I would have recorded an episode where I maybe opened by talking about these various things, that it's better to be on your own, working harder, than living under someone else's roof, even a parent. It's not because I lacked freedom. My dad let me do whatever I wanted from when I was a kid. The caveat being, he and my mom would say this too, I didn't want to do anything. You could give someone unlimited freedom. My parents, they wouldn't have done this. Nobody really does this, but they could have given me unlimited funds, as my mother used to say. They give me unlimited funds to do whatever I wanted. I wasn't going anywhere. Maybe I would have bought more video games. I was not the kind of person in my teens, 20s, 30s, where I was going to go out and go crazy. Just wasn't going to happen. But to be on your own, to be able to support yourself at a certain point in time. I always wanted to be a multimillionaire writer, but there are things that didn't click that now do. There are things which I understood intellectually. If you explained it to me, I would say, yeah, sure. But I hadn't lived it, so I didn't really know. I understood the value of $1. I went to school, right? I graduated from a really good college. But until you actually have to make decisions based on money, you're just a rube. And my father, who would have turned, sorry for Sheldon, look how cute he is. My father, who would have turned 83 on August 31st, he sheltered me from having to face real world consequences for not having enough money, like a lot of normal people deal with. And I didn't deal with that until the crazy run-up, which I've talked about, to getting into this place. And, it's not always about climbing the mountain. And then once you reach the top of the mountain, in this case, home ownership, well, that's it. It's all village of the nice, happy people from there on out. It isn't. And as a younger person, despite an alleged high IQ, there were concepts that I could explain to you. There are concepts which I got out of a book or which people told me. But until you go through it, you don't really understand. Intellectually, I got that my father was the type of personality who worked hard within normal parameters, and he would always say, he's in an air-conditioned, climate-controlled office for most of his professional life, the highest possible percentage of days of his professional life. He was a CPA, right? He was the Army accountant at Fort Jackson for 2 years after he was drafted. He didn't go to Vietnam. He was Vietnam era, but he didn't get sent overseas because somebody's got to balance the books even in the Army. Yeah, we'll keep Cohen over here. He's good working in a finance office. Leave him alone. Some variation on that is what the high command said. But you can understand things, and you start to realize, in very few instances, a low percentage of successful people are so successful that they didn't actually have to save money week to week and month to month. My dad was a slow accumulator. He was not somebody who came out the gate firing when he got out of college at 20 and all of a sudden was making crazy money. No, he got a good job, went to the military, came home, moved up the ladder a little bit, and just started saving. And wasn't somebody who spent foolishly. That was never his process. He was cautious. He wasn't opposed to spending money, but it had to make sense to him. There were very few impulse purchases that I can remember in my dad's entire life. I mean, I'm not going to say that my mother's engagement ring was an impulse purchase because they did end up getting married. Now, if he had spent, $5,000 in 1969 or 1970 on a ring that a woman that he wanted to marry, oh yeah, sure, Alan, I'll marry you. And then she takes the ring and disappears somewhere, never to be seen again. I would call that an impulse purchase. You got to be more careful. Even someone like me would say, yeah, but it's not what happened. It's not an impulse purchase. He bought himself a really nice winter coat 20 years ago. He had this down jacket that had gotten old and fallen into a little bit of disrepair. And he's like patching it up, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not ripping on anybody who tries to salvage an article of clothing that they like. But I remember, I'm 31 or so at the time, saying, Dad, you're allowed to get yourself another jacket, right? You know that you can buy yourself another jacket. He gave me a look like the thought had not crossed his head. I'm like, well, Joe, I just, just patching it up. Say, I understand. You don't need to throw the jacket out. But you can buy yourself another jacket. How many years have you been a CPA? You're doing okay. Yeah. You can buy yourself another jacket. I'm not going to judge you. He eventually bought himself another jacket. And he allowed himself a rare moment where he was actually commenting, and he told me what he was thinking. Because my dad, Alan Philip Cohen, was very quiet. He was guarded, not paranoid, but he didn't like to talk about himself. And there are things that he thought to himself that maybe he felt other people would find him strange. He's weird. He's just goofy. So he kept to himself. But he bought himself a really nice winter coat. It was lightweight, not lightweight baby, but it was a lightweight coat, but it was the sort of material where it was very good at cutting off wind, where even when it was really cold and windy, you still felt pretty comfortable. So he got this coat, and I had to talk him into it, And I guess you could say to his credit that he listened to me, that he knew I wasn't just blowing smoke at him when I was saying, come on. So he bought the coat and started wearing it around, and he really liked it. He said, you know what, Jared, this was a good idea. It was a good idea. No, he didn't say, I'm happy you bullied me into buying this coat. But he was happy that we had even had the conversation, that I brought it up, because there's a version of this where I don't say anything, and I'm just like, why is he patching up a coat? And this is just the coat that he's going to wear. He's had this coat for more than 10 years. Why doesn't he just get another coat? It was not his default setting. As a child of parents who lived through the Great Depression, people of that generation, and some of them were a little different a little slower on the uptake. And I do feel like my father's tendency to want to save and worry about down the road is because he knew that his parents had really gone through it in the Depression. Well, more so my grandmother, my dad's mom, Grandma Irene. Grandpa and Dad, they never had any money. The Great Depression was just more bad in a life that was filled with strife, and difficulties. But it's easy when we see things on social media, posts. I don't mean anything too outlandish, but it's easy to make assumptions, and certain assumptions are correct. People who have followed me and who know of me, and family I have talked about, there are certain things that are exactly as you would expect. My father was a diehard New York Yankees baseball fan going back to 1951. He was 8 years old for most of that season. Dad born August 31st, 1942. That was real. He really was a diehard Yankee fan. When he was in a hospital bed, the hospital bed that he really wasn't going to get out of, he watched Aaron Judge hit the 42nd home run that he hit in the 2022 season. And he was still rooting for it. That's true. That is 100% accurate. My dad really was the biggest movie fan that I knew. Also true. But people looking at posts and hearing me speak of him as somebody who was legitimately, I think, a pretty good guy. And he was a good dad. There are different kinds of, certainly ways of parenting, but there are different kinds of ways that people can be a good parent, I believe. He was a good dad. There were certain things that he saw as his responsibility as a father twice, myself and my sister. You can look back on his parenting and say, well, he made a lot of mistakes. He did. But the question is, what did he do that you would consider a mistake that another person would say, no, you got it backwards. He got this right, but he got that wrong. And that's all good. But where I kind of want to be a little bit more open is that because we looked alike, because we had similar sound to our voices, and we were wired in a similar fashion, it would be easy to assume that we always got along great, and we didn't. There were a lot of arguments. There was a lot of contentiousness going back to when I was a kid. Now, different when I was a kid, going through the teen angst, my so-called life era, although this was a little before my so-called life. I drove both my parents completely insane. And it's amazing that I didn't damage their lives by being the way that I was. But the way that my father was wired, and this I don't think is very much different, is that he believed in putting in a sort of conventional, honest day's work, and this is what you do. He couldn't have imagined having a child who was going to go into the arts, um, it isn't impossible to have, let's say, a 40-hour-a-week job in the arts. It kind of depends what you do. But it was the amorphous nature of what I was doing after college that bothered him, and the fact that it always appeared that I was on the precipice of something really incredible happening. I hate to boil it all down to money, but in the kind of business where you might work for 6 months or 8 months on one single project, as I was doing, and let's just say the Y.A. Tittle project for example, because that was a project that I was hired for. My father would not have liked, from a conceptual standpoint, as a younger person, if he had been asked, what do you think of this? Like if you were really good, if you were a really good writer, somebody who could develop stories, you had to work for, let's say, 6 months or 8 months, making very little money, relatively speaking. But there was a proverbial pot of gold, maybe, at the end of the rainbow. He wouldn't have been on board with it. And the reality is, if he had been then asked, so if you had a child who was pursuing that, he wouldn't wait. He would not have waited for you to ask the question. He would have immediately said, I would try to talk them out of it. I don't like that. You put in honest days, honest weeks, honest months work, and they know that you do, you should be paid as you do that work. So as I struggled to start to foster a screenwriting career, his frustrations were in part that I wasn't producing money. But the other part was that he saw that I was working, that I wasn't goofing off, that I was giving everything I had. And there were a couple of projects where when he read them, I think he was being honest. The guy was not afraid to be blunt and tell you when you screwed up or when something sucked. Because when I first started writing, the initial couple of screenplays of mine he read, he basically told me, this is not good. Boy, that hurt. That really hurt. So it meant more when later stuff he read, he says, man, this is amazing. I can't believe you even wrote this. So that's when you kind of trust somebody that they're going to be a straight shooter. He, at a certain point in time, just wanted me to get a regular job. You know, you can try to get a job in the movie business. This is something that I could have done, or I could have tried to do. I shouldn't make it seem as if these things are easy. But I could have tried to get a job in the movie business. And by that, I mean production companies going back to the 90s, such as New Line Cinema, Fine Line Features, Polygon, Miramax, but many companies who at least had offices in New York City. It's not that they had open hiring or anything like that. But, for example, a New York University graduate such as myself, if I were to have sent in an old school application by mail or even dropped in person, it's not that far-fetched that I may have gotten a job. I would have been working in the mailroom, even with a college degree, or being a low-level creative person, maybe reading scripts. But that may have been the way that should have been done. But I also was scared that I was going to end up like him. And I understand that's, what do you mean? Well, I saw how hard he worked, and honestly, it scared me because I didn't think that I was that person who could, for example, wake up, get ready, ride on the train for an hour, take the subway for 15 minutes, put in 8 days sitting at a desk and working on the Strauss Trust for 5 hours of the day, and then an audit for the last 3 hours of the day, 15 minutes on the subway, an hour train ride home. And then the next day you get to do that all over again. And the day after that, the day after that, the day after that, the day after that. Maybe you get Sundays off. But it's just an endless merry-go-round. I didn't want to do that. That was not how I saw my life. The idea of not having a boss, not having someone hanging over my desk, that's what I sought. But my father would say, or could say, well, Jared, eventually I became a boss. Once I was junior partner, I was only 30, 31 when I became junior partner. There wasn't anybody hanging over my desk. Yeah, I put in my hours, but there wasn't anybody telling me I wasn't allowed to leave or I had to get this done by the end of the day. I still couldn't see that for myself. I was afraid. And it is unfortunate that so much of my life was marked by fear defining action or inaction, but that's the way it goes. And that bothered him. That upset him about me. The fact that I didn't have a social life for huge chunks, it really hurt him. It hurt him badly. And, there are moments where we don't mean to be hurtful to other people. And we say things that are not really hurtful to them. We're not criticizing them, but they take it as if they've been punched or stabbed or shot, metaphorically. So when I was graduating high school, and it's amazing to think that I nearly didn't graduate high school. People who assume that I was an egghead my whole life. Well, yeah, I was, a high IQ imbecile, as I would like to say. I was somebody who had the appearance of a smart person, the appearance of a competent person, but I just kept failing classes because I didn't give a shit, because I was mad, because I didn't have any social life, because I had difficulty making friends. I mean, you heard these kinds of stories. Sometimes they're pretty true and pretty right on the button and right on the nose. The lack of social life. Well, my dad, who was very awkward, more so than me growing up, there was a part of him that probably ached. And it made him feel like less than what he already was in his 40s and, into his 50s, very successful by that point. It hurt him to know that his son had similar struggles. He never would have verbalized this. He never said anything like this to me. Never. I don't think he ever said anything like this to my sister. Maybe he talked to my mom about it. It's possible, because my grandparents, Nat and Irene, Dad's parents, I believe that they had to have been flabbergasted when their son showed up with my mother. No way they saw that coming. But there were moments in life that you don't realize at the time. You're not trying to make a grand point that is going to stick with you for the rest of your life, or stick with another person for the rest of their lives. But I said something as I was getting ready to graduate high school, which, given all of the classes that I failed, I mean, somebody could go into the books, and you want to talk about doing an audit, and try to figure out how I graduated high school, because I don't understand how I graduated high school. I mean, we go back in time and take away my diploma. You ain't taking away my New York University diploma. Do whatever you want, but that's mine. That belongs to me. I got to see Cosby give the commencement speech on May 19, 1997. That's mine. But Massapequa High School graduation, which was June 28th, 1992, I had completely fallen apart, big surprise, towards the end of the year as I attempted to have a social life and failed miserably, my failure being one of entire levels of inactivity and just not able to make interpersonal connections. Just couldn't do it. The way they did it is that the prom was the weekend of graduation. All right? So a couple of weeks or so, I think it was either a week, somewhere between a week and 2 weeks, regular classes were over. I was already assured of graduating. Again, I don't know how, but I was. The fix was in. Maybe Dad paid them $10,000 to let me graduate. I don't know. I don't really think that happened. That'd make for a great story if it all comes out now. Yeah, this Massapequa guy, he smeared somebody so that his son would graduate high school. Oh shit. Yeah, I don't think that's what happened. I can't imagine my dad doing anything like that. It is a little bit, that's suspicious, that's weird in the mode of Cardi B. But when I told my father that I I wasn't going to prom, it was like I stabbed him a little bit when I said that, because he knew that I had a crush on this girl, and I guess he was hoping that something was going to happen that didn't. I should also point out my father was younger at this point in history. He had yet to turn 50 than I am now. I could see that my dad was hurt by what I said. And I did something that you should never do to somebody that you love and that you know they're contemplating a lot of different things. And my dad was the sort of person who would keep running things through his head. Sometimes it was funny. If the Yankees lost a game, he would keep trying to think of what should the manager have done. And it would keep him up at night. Why did Buck take out Steve Howe? Why did he not leave him in? Eric Plunk sucks. Actual quote from 1991 when the team was 15 games under 500. He took the baseball very seriously. My dad was bothered. He was upset that I wasn't going to prom. And I said, this night, the night of the prom, this proves my failure as a human being. Now, I thought that I was just hurting myself by saying that. I was angry. I wasn't mad at him. I was mad at me. This proves my failure as a human being. I'm 18 years old, and I'm already talking like, yeah, I had a good run. Actually, I had a terrible run. Do not recommend, pass. I had a terrible run. That bothered him for the rest of his life. For the next 30 years, it upset him that I had said that. He never talked about it, but I know that it did because he brought it up a couple of times. It was something that he couldn't get out of his head. And I wish I hadn't said it. But I did. And I meant it at the time. But it was what they call triumphant misery, where I was so twisted and I was so angry that I almost took delight in self-sabotage. And I wouldn't have seen it that way at the time, but all these years later, it's pretty clear. Was I engaging in self-sabotage because I didn't think that I deserved nice things? I don't know. Dad didn't talk openly that often. You really had to know him, but you had to approach it, almost use angles to get to him. He was okay with surface. He was okay just talking movies and baseball. Dad, did you ever see me as somebody who was going to have a normal life? I never asked him that question. I do know that when in my late 30s, I started to have a functional social life. I got together with a woman who would become my wife, fell in love in the most conventional way possible, got married. That's the happiest, and that was the happiest that my dad was with regards to me, because he could take solace in the fact that, I didn't think the kid was even going to have anything approaching a real life. Now he is. Well, I was, but I still didn't have any real pressure on me, because as much as he might get frustrated at having to kind of help me out and bail me out, if you will, he would rather have been doing that than supporting me doing nothing. And I wasn't living in the basement, but you understand what I'm saying. He got that there are levels of failure and levels of success in life. There are areas in which I failed that he didn't expect, but there were areas in which I succeeded that he also didn't expect. So if somebody had asked him when I was in my middle teens and I was flunking every class, would you sign up for this and this, but also this and that? Yeah, he would have. I did drive him crazy. But towards the end of his life, he started to see me in a different light. He started to see me as somebody who wasn't just a high IQ imbecile. He never said that, but that's the idea. But somebody who was competent. Because you can be competent and not make a tremendous success of yourself in your chosen field. Or you can be somebody who isn't really very good at your job, but just happen to get into the right angle and the right line. Because I never could have imagined that there would be people who were CPAs who weren't that good at their job and still made billions. Dad knew a couple. And he said, you know what you say to those guys, Jerry? You know what you say to those accountants who really aren't very good accountants, but they just happen to find a slot and make a ton of money? No, just call them bookkeepers. That was the ultimate insult, my dad. You really wanted to piss him off. We go back 20 years, when somebody called him a bookkeeper. I don't think anybody ever called my old man a bookkeeper. Yeah, he's a glorified bookkeeper, Jerry. He's not even a very good accountant. It's embarrassing. He didn't talk like that very often. Every now and then, if a client was fucking with him, he says, you know what? Why don't you take your return to H&R Block? Or if he was really mad, take your return to H&R fucking Block. He's a nice guy, quiet guy, but he didn't suffer fools gladly. And he knew when clients were screwing around and trying to get free service, 10 hours of billable time, but only charge us 5, that kind of thing. He didn't go for that shit. But we did have an up and down relationship. But it is also true that there was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of laughter. There were hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of Yankee games that we watched together. We went to a lot of games. And I'm sad that he's not still here. I'm sorry that he did not get to celebrate his 83rd birthday yesterday. There was a version of The Matrix, as I like to say, where his health did not slip precipitously as it did. And he's here right now because the house was his idea. He wanted me to, get something on your own. You're living in an apartment in Huntington. You spend all that money on rent every month. You should have something for yourself. Both you and your sister should have something for yourselves. So he thought that he could live out his golden years here with me. But unfortunately, he never saw anything of this house other than the shell, the kind of outline, because I don't even know. I think it was just a hole in the ground now that I'm thinking of it. And this is all so bad. I'm sorry for being depressing, but I put pen to paper on this place when I don't even think they had carved out, the structure. I put pen to paper in March of 2022. And Dad went into the hospital in April, I think, and he never came out. He went from hospital, rehab facility. He didn't come home again. So he did not get to move here. And ultimately, it was left to me to do the best I could. And I've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate all along. But I've been fortunate in that I've been able to find something I can do, which it's work, but it's not, if we're being honest, it's not really that difficult. And I get to do the podcast and connect with you, hopefully entertain you and not be depressive all the time. But life is about rolling with the punches and ups and downs, daily ups and downs. And then when you look back on certain years and certain seasons of your life, you say, you know what, I mostly got this right. I mostly got that wrong. Do feel as if I'm the sort of personality who can adjust and who can make mistakes and not make the exact same mistakes again. And I got that from my dad, because there were stories that he shared, there were things that he talked about, which I understood he was telling me, okay, he's saying he learned from an error. He talked to this person, and that person turned out to not be so good. He didn't talk to him anymore. Didn't say anything, didn't insult anybody, but no thank you. I'm all set here. I don't need to deal with this guy. He was very subtle. He was not an on-the-nose, nail-meat-head kind of a personality. It isn't that he was deliberately vague, but he didn't speak in grand pronouncements. He wasn't a big orator, and he wasn't somebody who liked to wag his finger at you and tell you, this is a lesson and this is what you need to do. You had to glean, if there was a life lesson, in the way that he explained things, how he saw the world, how he saw being a professional, how he saw being a father. He was not going to, he wasn't going to turn his back on me because I struggled. Because he would say, well, he works hard. He's not messing around here. I see him sitting in front of his computer for hours a day. He's doing the best he can. He would see that. And, Grandpa Nat, his father, may he rest in peace, would say stuff like, Al, you could set him up in an apartment, just sink or swim. Maybe he'll figure it out. So no, it's not going to work, Dad. I don't know. That would have been interesting. Because that's not the craziest idea. Drop a kid on its head in his 30s and just see what happens. Here's something that I know, though, before I close this. When I was living in the apartment in Huntington, this was before COVID, this was 2019. My marriage had ended and I was living on my own with the cats in the apartment. And I was running an illegal Airbnb. Now, Alan Philip Cohen, he's not the kind of guy that you would have expected to be on board with his son running an illegal Airbnb, but he didn't say anything. Yeah, it's okay. You're making money. Good. So when the illegal Airbnb, and I'm not even joking, this is exactly what it was. When the illegal Airbnb got shut down, it's like De Niro and Coppola. It's been shut down by the mayor. They never give you any napkins from this place. But when the illegal Airbnb got shut down, there was a chance, well, more than a chance, there was a likelihood that me at age 45 was going to have to move home. I was going to have to crawl back a mile to my dear old dad. And he was okay with it. Shit happens. But I said, no. I'm going to temporarily shelve my lofty, grand ambitions. I mean, by this point, I had to know that it wasn't going to happen. I'm going to get a regular job. I'm going to start making some money. I'm not leaving this apartment. I'm not moving home. This is unacceptable. Started driving for Postmates. And it's not like I was making a shit ton of money, but I was making enough. I was making enough to survive the illegal Airbnb getting shut down. Just saying that is great, right? So I was able to stay in the apartment. And I guess from a certain point of view, the kind of chutzpah, the moxie, the gumption that I showed, the fact that I wasn't willing to admit failure, even though I knew that I had failed. No, I got to stay here. I have to stay here. This is now my first time living on my own at 45 because I went from living in my father's house to moving in with my future bride and then bride. And then suddenly I was on my own, and I kind of wanted to be on my own. So he respected that. And then as his health precipitously dropped in the latter portion of 2021 and 2022, I had to do a lot of stuff that I wasn't really trained for, but I learned. I learned fast. And if I didn't exactly have the life that he envisioned for me, I feel like in his last days, he thought that I was on the right track. And he always would say that I was more organized than he imagined. He says, you're really, I don't know, you're just very organized, Jerry. You're very organized. Oh, thanks, Dad. I appreciate that. He wasn't big on compliments, so when he would throw them out there, even in his later era, it's good. Much appreciated. But anyway, I'm sorry I've run so long. But was my dad. He would have turned 83 yesterday. Despite our ups and downs, I miss him. I really do wish that his health had not gone downhill and he could have had golden years like his father, Nathan Cohen, who made it to 96, still living alone, still driving, still paying his own bills on time by check every month within a week of his passing in 2010. Nathan Cohen outlived 4 girlfriends. He lived for another 15 years after my grandmother, beloved Grandma Irene, passed in 1994. But Alan Philip Cohen, born August 31st, 1942, passed August 26th, 2022. Bronx High School of Science graduate, CCNY Baruch graduate, Army veteran, entrepreneur, CPA, father to Jessica and me, husband to my mom, Candy Brightcoff Cohen, diehard Yankees fan, Scrabble assassin, expert puzzle solver. My dad could put together 1,000-piece puzzles as if he had a map in his head. I'd never seen anybody do it the way that he did it. There were just certain things that he was great at. Miss you, Dad. This has been episode 603 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of this, it's 1:40 a.m. on September 1st, here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.